Hi, this is Adam Martin. I'm the Digital Bureau Director for Capital News Service. And today I'm going to show you guys how to make some charts, maps, and basic graphics using an online application called Datawrapper. I'm going to run through a couple slides real quick, and then we will just jump into doing some hands-on exercises to create some simple graphics using Datawrapper. This first slide sort of shows the Datawrapper interface. We'll go through all this in detail in just a minute. First thing I want to show you guys is just some different types of graphics that you can create with Datawrapper. You can create charts and maps. This is what a Datawrapper graphic would look like on the page. All Datawrapper graphics are responsive, so they're going to look good on desktop and also on mobile without really any additional work from you. They also look great on the page if they're going to be printed. There's different templates or themes, as they call them in Datawrapper, so you can get different sort of looks and feel from your graphics. So let's take a look at a few different graphic types. This is sort of the Datawrapper menu, and it shows you all the different charts and map types and tables that you can create using the program. So first we'll look at charts. Here's a basic line chart. And you can see that right off the shelf, all graphics in Datawrapper have really nice interactivity where you can highlight different elements and pull specific data points right out of the graphics. This is a bar chart or a column chart that lets you sort of cycle through the different data points that are included in the data. This is what's called a dot plot. Here we have just some donut charts, which are sort of very similar to pie charts, and these are called multiple donuts because they're showing several donut charts next to each other for comparison. Here we have a scatter plot. So that's charts. Datawrapper also has lots of great map features. This is a chloropleth map, and we'll create a really simple chloropleth here in a couple minutes. You can see that Datawrapper contains lots of different maps already included in it, and we'll look at some of the maps for Maryland that come preloaded in the software. It has over 1,000 maps already preloaded in it. Here's a quick sample of them here. So you can also, if you have your own map in the proper format, which is in this case is GeoJSON, you can also upload it right into the program. You can create cartograms. You can create symbol maps. You can also create simple locator maps. To create locator maps, you just add locations inside the program, and it will go ahead and put dots and let you add pop-up windows. So you can also create shaded relief maps to give more of a 3D feel. And that's maps. Next we'll look at tables, right? Tables are a nice graphic that sort of let people explore, the data in more of a raw form generally, but also you can use tables to sort of combine several different types of graphics together, as we see here. Here we see using color coding on tables. You can also upload your own images for tables to create a look and a feel, something like this. And all graphics in Datawrapper are optimized for mobile. They're responsive, which means that they're going to work on both desktop and in mobile, which is really important in the modern web environment. So once you create a graphic or a map in Datawrapper, you have a couple ways to export it, and we'll look at that when we create our own maps, but in general we see the options here. So for online, we want to copy out an embed code, which you see up at the top of this slide, and you always want to choose the responsive iframe option, and you can copy and paste that right into the Capital News Service WordPress site, right directly into your story, and it will appear wherever you paste it. You can also export your graphics as static files, so as a PNG, a PDF, or an SVG, if you wanted static graphics for print or to send along via email. Okay, so let's go ahead now and create a few simple graphics in Datawrapper. Everybody at CNS can have free access to Datawrapper. All you have to do is send me a Slack message or an email and let me know that you want access and give me your email address, and I'll sign you up for the Capital News Service Datawrapper account, and you'll have unlimited access through us as long as you're a student here. There's also a free version that you can sign up for, but for any graphics that you make for Capital News Service, we're going to want you to use our account because we don't have the same limitations as you're going to have with a free account, right? We have a lot. It's a much more powerful account, so we want you to use ours. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to create a bar chart. You can see if you want to create a new chart, a new map, or a new table, you do so right up here. You can also always see all the charts that have been created so far by clicking Team Charts, and that's going to show you all the charts that we've created for Capital News Service so far. Let's go ahead and create a new chart, and we're going to create a bar chart. So the first thing that you need to do to create any graphic is you need to upload your data. So for our bar chart, we're going to use some data that I have over here in a spreadsheet that looks at hot weather deaths in Maryland and specifically in Baltimore City over the last few years. So here I have data from 2012 to 2018, looking at the number of heat-related deaths in Baltimore and the number of heat-related deaths in Maryland overall. So you can see, for example, that in 2012 there were 46 heat-related deaths in Maryland, and 13 of those were in Baltimore. In 2018 there were 28 overall, and 13 of those were in Baltimore. So what this data ultimately tells us is that sort of a disproportionate number of heat-related deaths are happening in Baltimore, right? Because Baltimore is a very small portion of the state of Maryland. Okay, so what we want to do is we're just going to copy and paste our data here right out of the spreadsheet. We can paste it right here into Datawrapper, and that's our first step. Datawrapper will let you upload your file also, or import right from a Google Sheet, or link to an external data set. But in general, I find it easiest just to copy and paste your data right in here. So you can see it came in, it looks a little funky, but once we hit proceed, the next step is to check our data, and we can see it brought it in correctly, right? We've got our year, we have our values for Baltimore, and our values for Maryland. Excuse me. Okay, so since this looks good, I should point out you can also add columns to your data down here, and you can also transpose your columns, which means swapping rows and columns. So if we click that, it'll set it up in a slightly different way, which, depending on what kind of chart or graph you're trying to create, might be important. But for our purposes right now, this is how we want our data to be structured. So we'll just click Proceed, and looks like I'm getting a text up here with some pictures. Sorry about that. And so on the next screen, what we get is options for the different charts that we can create with our data. So right off the shelf, it gave us sort of a line chart, which is okay, right? It's showing us Maryland in this line and Baltimore in this line. But I don't think that's quite what we want to do. Let's try some different bar chart options for this. So for instance, maybe we want to make what they call a column chart, right? And what this is going to do is going to put our data on two different tabs. So in the first tab, we're seeing Baltimore, and on the second tab we see Maryland. We can also look at it as a grouped bar chart, which means it's grouping the data together. I don't think that's super useful. A couple other options that might be interesting. We have some stacked bars, which is showing our data that way. So each year it's bringing together the data. But I think for this particular data, the best thing to do is for us to look at this as grouped bars, because in this case, right, we can see the Baltimore and the Maryland numbers side by side to easily compare them for each year. Okay, so I think that's the chart type that we'll go ahead and keep. So next we're going to go over to our Refine tab. So this tab is going to give us lots of options to sort of refine and customize our data. So first, if we didn't like the year as our label, we could change it, but we don't have really any other options here, or any other options under groups to customize our axes. We could resort the bars, but we don't really want to do that. So one thing we can do is we can change the alignment of the labels. Perhaps we want the labels to go left or right, not much of a difference there. Could display the labels on a separate line. This is also giving us options to show the values. Right now we're showing them always. We could also have it so the values are just shown on hover or never. We'll just go ahead and keep it always. We could also change it so that our values are shown on the right or on the left. And if we wanted to, we could change the format that our numbers are being shown in, or also the format that our dates are being shown in. But all that's fine for right now. And if we take a look at our graphic, right, we can see how sort of Datawrapper has some nice interactivity built right into it. So we can select Baltimore, Maryland to see the different values under there. We can move around, sort of see the different values, and it'll automatically highlight different groups for us. So if we come down, we can also select grid lines, and it'll give us some grid lines, which I don't think we'll use right here. We can change the colors, right? If we click on base color, it'll let us select just like a single value, and it'll create some colors for us based on that. We can also individually customize the colors. So if we wanted to select what color we wanted for Baltimore, we could choose a color up here. We could also use the slider to select a custom color, or use a hex value. Let's say we wanted to use a specific color. There we go, and we could do the same with Maryland, and just really customize everything to however we wanted it to be. Okay, so here we have an option to show our color key or not, which is basically our legend. We definitely want to show that. It'll give us an option to put some bars in the background, or to separate the rows with a dotted line, just to help break up the data a little bit. We'll go ahead and keep that. We also have an option to show slightly thicker bars if we want to, or just the default thin bars. We could also change the range, which in this case with this data doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do. So just go ahead and leave that there. You can see down here, right, we can change the size of our chart. So we want it to be 800 by 600. For our purposes, that doesn't make a lot of sense because we're going to export responsive embeds, which means it's going to resize itself to the size of the screen, so the size doesn't really matter much. That would be more important if you were going to export print versions. There's also a colorblind check down here, which will show you how people with different sorts of color blindness would see our graphics. So you can see, people who have this type of color blindness, this color scheme wouldn't be very good for them. So this probably wouldn't be a great color scheme to go with ultimately. So in fact, maybe we'll go ahead and, customize the colors. We can just reset them and go back to sort of the default colors, or we can choose some of the, have Datawrapper choose a couple colors for us. Okay, so now we can go over to Annotate, and it'll let us add in some headlines and descriptions and other information for our graphic. So we're going to go ahead and give our graphic a headline. Just a nice descriptive headline to let people know what they're looking at. So the graphic is showing heat-related deaths in Maryland and Baltimore. Now we're going to add a description that's going to drill down a little bit and let people know what this graphic says or what the data says, right? So heat-related deaths in Maryland and Baltimore. And then for our description, it's going to say Baltimore has more than its share of heat-related deaths in Maryland. And finally, we want to make sure we add a source. And in this case, the source is the Maryland Department of Health. And we can also add a link to our data source, which is a really great thing to do. In this case, this is data that we collected from a few different places, so we don't have a good link to add. You can also add notes if you need to. So you can say note here, right? So if you needed to, make a little asterisk or some other information about the graphic that you wanted people to know, there's a space for that. And finally, we can add a byline. I'll add my name there. You can see it went ahead and added the byline and the source down here at the bottom. Finally, Datawrapper will highlight certain elements for us if we want. So for instance, we can see 2012 was the year with the most deaths. Maybe we wanted to highlight 2012. Also maybe we'd want to highlight the most recent year. Or maybe we don't really want to highlight any at all. We just want to let people sort of look at the data and come to their own conclusions. All right, so nice simple bar graph, pretty good shape here. There's also this design tab, which will let you choose a couple different layouts, which are basically just like templates that will change the way the graphic looks a little bit. I almost always just leave it on this regular data wrapper with data layout, which I think is the best way to go. Also, under this tab, we have this nice Enable Social Sharing button. When we click that, it'll add, some share buttons to our graphic, which is always a good thing to do. And we can just say, share site chart is embedded in, and so it'll go ahead and share the page in which we embed the chart, which is ultimately what we want. Okay, so this is in good shape, right? This is a nice, simple bar chart that we can go ahead and publish for use on CNS. So if we click Publish, you can see this is going to give us some options. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and click Publish, and it will publish the chart. Now it's going to give us the option to embed. Right, so first of all, it gives us a URL that we can use to share the data if we just wanted to send it to somebody. It will, here's a nice URL up here that you could send right to someone to see this chart. For our purposes, we want to use this embed code, and we always want to click responsive iframe, and we want to use this responsive iframe. And you can just copy that. That'll give you a little bit of code that you can copy and paste directly into a WordPress post, right into your story in WordPress, right where you want it to appear. And it should display the graphic right there. If you ever have problems pasting an embed code into your story, talk to your editor. Sometimes there are permissions issues. Everybody should have permission to do that, but sometimes the permissions get a little weird, and your editor will definitely have the right permissions and can help you out. And down here we have our options to export the chart as a static graphic, right? So if we do that, we're not going to have all this great interactivity, but it will export it as a nice image, either as a PNG or a PDF is generally what you'll want to use. And you can use that to send right to another newspaper for print or to email or whatever you need to do with it. So if we click PNG, which is pretty standard size, right, it'll let us choose the width for our export, a couple other options, and we can just click Download PNG. Take a second, then I'll just go ahead and have that open with preview so we can see what it looks like. And it just outputted this nice static graphic for us. So that's really all you need to do to create a nice bar chart with Datawrapper. So let's go ahead and create one more. Next we'll create a line chart using a little bit more complex data. So if we look at this spreadsheet here, this is some data that we collected as part of our Code Red project last year, or in 2019, and we used some sensors that we built to collect indoor heat index from some houses in Baltimore City, and this is the heat index values from one such house that we collected. And then we also have paired that up with the outdoor heat index at that time, which we just collected from a local weather station in Baltimore. So here we've got it broken up in 4-hour increments, so at 7/16/2019 at 12 a.m., 4 a.m., 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. We've got that data for a few really hot days during a heat wave in the summer of 2019. Okay, so we can create a nice line chart with this that will let people sort of compare the indoor heat index and the outdoor heat index, which is kind of interesting because as you can see, at many times it was actually hotter inside than it was outside in some of these homes. So again, I'll just copy and paste this data, copy it, and I'll go ahead and paste it right into Datawrapper, and we'll click Proceed, double check to make sure it imported it correctly, which it did. Right, this looks exactly like what we saw in the spreadsheet a second ago, so we're good there, and we'll click Proceed. And again, this is going to go ahead and default to a line chart, which is good in this case. I think that a line chart is probably what we want to go with. It's not a bad idea to click around a little bit to see how your data will look as different chart types. For instance, we could see what this data looked like as a dot plot, which is okay. It's a little bit harder to interpret. It's also going to be interesting range plots, which are going to take the indoor heat index and the outdoor heat index and actually show the differences between them, or even an arrow plot, which will show which direction the trends are sort of going there. But I think in general, the clearest way to let people see this data is with a line chart. And when you're doing graphics, that's what you really want to think about is, how can I most simply impart this information to people so that they understand it? So we're going to go ahead and just use this line chart, and we'll go ahead and click Refine and take a look at some of the options that it gives us. Okay, so, a couple things here. With I think the horizontal axis is fine. That's this one down here. You can see it's collected it's displaying some of the dates and times from our data, but not every one because there's too many. But you can hover over the lines to see all the data points that were within the data, which is nice. So we'll come back up to the vertical axis because I do want to change that a little bit. But let's go ahead and change the colors, right? So we can, just like before, we can change, we can select a color and Datawrapper will select colors for us, or we can customize individual colors, ourselves if we wanted to do that. So we could make that one purple, and we could make this one red, or whatever we wanted to do. And I think actually I'll just reset them and let them use these two red values for the moment. Okay, so next we can change line width. If we want our lines to be thicker, we just click, or thinner, right? Or we can no line, or we can go back to sort of the default width, which is what I think we'll stick with here. You can also make your lines dashed in a number of different ways if you wanted to do that for some reason, which I don't think we do now. And you can also change the way that the lines are created. So right now, we've got these linear lines, but we can also change them to be curved lines in a number of different ways, which I think is actually kind of interesting here because temperature, does generally operate in these curves, not in these really harsh spikes, right? It tends to go up and down in a more subtle way. We can also fill in the area between lines to sort of highlight the areas in between if our data, gave us a reason to do that, which I don't think it necessarily does right now. Here we can also change, right now it's showing us our labels for our lines sort of here at the end. I think it might be more interesting to have a legend that sort of shows people up at the top what the two different colors mean. We can also change information about our tooltip down here, right? We can change the number format or etc. We've got these line symbols, right? So what we can do here is we can actually, so right now it's putting a dot at the first, a circle at the first and the last point, but since we have a lot of data here, we could actually put it at every point where we have data to let people know, all the places they can explore along these lines, which again, I think is pretty interesting and really visually lets people know where there's data embedded in this chart that they can play with a little bit. And you can make these dots bigger, you can make them smaller, depending on what you think looks good. We'll keep it around 3.5. You can also make them a little opaque if you feel like they're getting in the way a little bit too much. You can also change the shape to be squares or diamonds or triangles or whatever you think is best, but I think the circles look pretty good. So we've really customized this graphic quite a bit. I think it looks pretty nice here. The one thing that's a little weird is we see our data is actually dipping down below our chart and above our chart here, which means that I think the best thing to do for that case is change the horizontal axis a little bit. So here's where this custom range comes into place. So we could make this, instead of starting at 80 and going up to 110, we could make it start at 70 and go up to 120 so that it displays all of our data. Now this still isn't perfect, right? Because now we have some space that's not used. So maybe a better way to do it would be to make it go from 75 to 115. Right now all of our data is included in the graphic without there being a lot of space there. So I think that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with the way that looks. So next we'll go to Annotate and add a little bit of headline and description. So for our headline here, we're going to make it say, indoor and outdoor heat index during Baltimore heat wave. And then we're going to add a little bit of description to let people know more specifically what it is that they're looking at. So recorded on July 16th to 22nd, 2019. Indoor data was captured using sensors placed in a second floor bedroom in an unair-conditioned home. Okay, so we're letting people know how we collected the data and when specifically it was recorded. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and add our source. We have a really long source here because we got the data from a few different places. And I'll go ahead and add my byline as well. Okay, so this is really starting to come together. And I think that, you know, we don't need to add it to highlight any ranges or anything here. I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. So I'll go ahead and click proceed. I think we'll enable social sharing on here as well. Always a good thing to do. And yeah, I think this graphic is pretty much ready to go. It looks really nice. So we'll go ahead and click publish. And I'll publish the chart. Okay, and again, right, we've got our link that we can share. We've got our responsive iframe embed code that we want to use on the website. We can also export a static graphic if we want to. Okay, so now for one final graphic I'd like to show you how to make. We'll create a simple chloropleth map. And you can see there's 3 different types of maps you can make. Pretty self-explanatory, right? If you want to go through and play around with these, certainly making locator and symbol maps are not too difficult to do. I want to show you guys how to use the chloropleth maps today. So if we click on chloropleth map, the first thing it's going to ask us to do is select our map. And like I mentioned earlier, there are just a ton of different options for maps here. You know, you can select it by continent, etc. I want to scroll down. You can see how many there are. We'll scroll down to the US, and we'll find Maryland. All right, here we go. USA. Maryland, and we've got zip codes. We've also got legislative tracts, district courts, and counties, which is actually what we want to use right now. So this shows every county in Maryland, and we'll go ahead and click next, and it's going to let us insert our data. So I have some data here that I've already sort of formatted for this use. And this shows, according to one projection, how many extreme heat events each Maryland county can expect in the year 2040, I believe. Yeah. So, you know, I'm just going to copy and paste this data. It's got 2 columns, the county name and the projected number. And I'm just going to go ahead and just paste over top of all this stuff here. And that didn't quite do that right. Let's try that again. I'm going to try doing it without my column headers there. There we go. And that's a sort of hanging chad there from the last one. Okay. So now if we click proceed, right, we can see it's going to go ahead and create a map based on that data. So it just created a nice legend for us here where it broke down, you know, based on the numbers that we gave it, it created this nice chloropleth map showing the heat events, projected number of heat events for each county in 2040. Right, so a lot of this work was really in formatting of the data, right? As long as you've collected the data and set it next to the right county, Datawrapper does a lot of the work for you here. So again, we don't need to select the column. This is already all set up for us. We can change the colors here. You can change colors for individual stops. You can add the number of stops in your color ramp. You know, we're going to go ahead and leave this as is for now. It's doing it in 5 increments of 5, which is totally fine. You know, as far as changing the colors, I would generally go with one of the color ramps that's predefined in the program. That's going to be easiest. We'll just go ahead and leave it with this top one for now, which is a pretty nice looking color ramp. So one option it gives us is to customize tooltips. So right off the bat, there are really no tooltips, but that's a nice thing to have, right? So if we go back and we look at our data, you can see it's arranged our data by two columns. It's called the county, the ID, and the number of heat events, the value. And that's how we'll have to refer to that data when we create the tooltip. So you can see, you can click either one and it'll add it. So for instance, maybe we want the ID to be the title, and then we can insert the value, which is going to, so it's going to say the county name, and then in the body, it's going to tell us the number of heat events. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like, right? So it's just showing us, right, the county and the number of heat events for that county. And maybe we want to customize that a little bit more and have it say, you know, the number and then heat events in 2040. Okay, and so now it'll give us a little bit more, you know, this tooltip gives us a little bit more information. And maybe we want to hedge a little bit because we don't really know, and we'll say this is projected heat events in 2040, right? Because it's really a projection. Okay, so we've got the map zoomable. You know, we can, we've got our map key over here, and you can see it's kind of weird. It's overlapping with our map. So maybe instead of having that in the bottom right, you know, with Maryland, it's always a good idea to put your key or your legend in the bottom left because there's this big empty space here. We can also add a title, right? So number of heat events in 2040, right? Okay. And so we've really cleaned that up. Looks pretty nice. Not a lot more we really need to do with that. Let's go over and add our headline now. So we're going to give this a headline that says projected heat events in the year 2040. We'll give it a description that says, it sort of lets people know what they're looking at. So this map shows the number of projected heat events in the year 2040 for each Maryland county according to one projection. Okay, and we'll go ahead and add a source, which is the Maryland Climate and Health Report. And I'll go ahead and add my byline. Okay, and again, I think this is pretty much ready to go at this point. I'll go over to design and enable social sharing. And this is ready to publish, right? So I can come over here and click Publish Chart. And it'll go ahead and publish the chart and allow me to copy the embed that I can paste right into my WordPress story to get a map that looks exactly like this in my story wherever I want it to go. Okay, so I really encourage you to play around with Datawrapper and explore some of the other chart and graph types that exist there. I wanted to show you guys a few resources here. So let's go back to the presentation just really quick. So Datawrapper has some training, right, at academy.datawrapper.de. And that's the URL for Datawrapper is datawrapper.de. And they're going to have all kinds of information in their academy about how to create different chart types and just a great knowledge base. There's also a button directly in the app while you're creating graphics, the Need Help button that will help you, you know, with specific tasks for creating the graphic that you're trying to do right there. There's also a great Datawrapper blog at blog.datawrapper.de that highlights different types of graphics and different methods, and pretty interesting read. The blog also shows some weekly charts that you can sort of get inspiration from, and some how-tos. There's a newsletter. There's a Twitter feed. And there's also what's called a river at river.datawrapper.de, which just shows like recent charts and graphs that people have made in Datawrapper for inspiration. So finally, if you're interested in trying to make any of the graphics that we did in this training session, there's a data wrapper exercise that includes the data that we just used at this URL right here. It's go.umd.edu/I uppercase Y uppercase C. And there's also a Datawrapper workshop that was put out by Datawrapper. It has 200 training slides. It's very in-depth, that I've also hosted at go.umd.edu/I capital Y V. So have fun, make graphics for Datawrapper. If you have any questions, please let me know.